Welcome to, thanks for having me, and welcome to Intrusion Analysts and Threat Hunting with Suricata talk. This is actually done and developed by Josh Stroshan and myself. I will be leading and presenting today. And we'll try to actually give you a little bit of overview of what Suricata can do and what you can do with Suricata. And actually, we also would like to showcase you one example that you can actually take home with you and try it out, whether it's in your test setup or your production setup and similar things. And I'll be walking you through and explaining all that. So this is going to be like a sort of a lecture and a little bit of a hands-on demo from my side. So let's move on. I will present Josh to you. Josh is actually our Director of Training and Outreach. We might talk together. He just wasn't available to join in today. He's threat researcher at Bromium, Air National Guard retired, plural site owner, kind of a ninja on open directories and similar things. He often, I strongly recommend you follow him on Twitter. He often posts cool stuff in there, and especially open dir and similar things. So a very good resource, a very nice colleague, and a very bright mind. Myself, I have actually been with Suricata for the past 11 years, I think, since the creation of the project. Been involved mainly around QA and training lead. I'm also co-founder of Sandboxing Networks. My name is Peter Manev. My Twitter feed is Pevma. I'm part of the OSSF executive board. Alongside with that, we try to give back to community as much as possible. So I've been maintaining cells for a bit with other colleagues and friends in the community, of course, as well. And been involved pretty much in anything and everything around with Suricata, and been loving it so far, and hopefully for a lot more time to come. Now, I just pasted the link on chat. It's the shortened version, but inside there, if you click, you'll find a training distro. Let's say the pickups are inside a training distro already, and a couple of other readmes and documents. Please be aware that actually most of the pickups may actually contain live malware. So be careful on what you click, what you double click on, especially on exported objects and similar things. And do it in an isolated or sandbox environment only, FYI. So the training distro that you'll find in the folder is actually based on Selks, which is an open source distribution entirely based on Suricata and the data that Suricata can produce. The samples, the PCAP samples, actually big shout out and thank you to Malware Traffic Analysis. Brad has been great at actually posting out very cool examples, and I'd actually like to look at one of those examples today and to give an idea or a hint actually that you can take into production right away with some actual results. So let's move on. Now, what's the agenda for today? I'd like to talk a little bit about OSSF, Suricata and how they're connected, and give you also an idea about a kind of a small live threat hunting hands-on session. Okay, so that's the agenda. The goals are very simple. Would like to explain some of the main features of Suricata. I'll try to pack as much as possible inside that 45 minutes, 1 hour that we have here today. Explain a little bit of what Suricata is capable of doing, what kind of data is capable of producing, showcase the concept of threat hunting that you can actually take home as an example. And exactly that, walk away with that actual example that you can use in practice. So OSSF. OSSF actually stands for Open Information Security Foundation. It is a non-profit organization that actually owns the Suricata code. Suricata code is open source, of course, available on GitHub. And the main idea here is that actually Suricata will always stay open source, for Suricata to stay open source, and so that nobody, doesn't matter how much money they have, to be able to buy it off or similar things. So that's the ground truth, the ground setting there, open source and hard. The funding for the Open Information Security Foundation comes mainly from sponsors, partners. We have received phenomenal support from the community. People in different organizations are donating code, donating QA, or helping us out with conferences and trainings. And similarly, we also have a Suricon event, which is every year. This year will be in Boston, Massachusetts. It will be virtual and in person. Also, the OSSF actually conducts a lot of trainings in and around Suricata. Those include like network security monitoring, signature development, advanced deployment, deep dives. We also have an online course too. Now, Suricata. You may or may have not heard about Suricata, but I just want to give you a hint. So actually, Suricata is widely used. So pretty much you name top 10 or 20 of everything, search engines, banks, big organizations, Fortune 500s, and most of them are actually using Suricata in some way, shape, or form, even AWS. So Suricata is a network threat detection engine. As I mentioned, it's owned and supported by the Open Information Security Foundation, which is non-profit, open source, and is actually worked on and contributed from people from all continents. Okay, so what it can do and how it can deploy it. There's different things that Suricata can do. And sometimes not everybody is aware of that. So yes, it could be deployed as IDS. Yes, IPS as well. It could be deployed as a hybrid between the IDS and IPS. So in other words, you can sit offline, not inline, but still try to tear down the malicious connections, let's say. It can be deployed purely as a network security logging solution. So imagine running without rules or without threat intel, just logging everything that sees on the network. You can do that too. You can do all the combinations. Suricata actually can also do full packet capture by itself. So anything that it sees, you can store it on disk as well, built in natively. It has the capability to do full protocol logging for network forensic evidence and incident response and investigations and similar things. It can also digest any threat intel. So you want to talk about hashes, files, or JA3s, URLs, domains, certificates, TLS certificates, and IP, list, reputation, similar things. It can ingest all that, no problem. And again, threat intelligence agnostic. It can also just be deployed to read PCAPs. So in other words, you can start up Suricata and just throw PCAPs at it or point it to a folder, and it will continuously read them as come and go. Very good for like investigations or sandboxing and the similar deployment scenarios. Now, here is one of many deployment scenarios, and this is more on what the training distro is around. So basically, you have your Suricata engine. You have a rule set manager. You have in the likes of Suricata Update or Sirius, let's say, you have some hunting tools in there. You have your rule sets or threat intel providers. You actually plug it into a span port tab to sniff off the traffic. The Suricata engine does its job, threat detection, network protocol logging, and similar. It can output, as I mentioned, FPC, full packet capture. It can put that data into an elk stack and naturally use the likes of Moloch Viewer and Kibana to visualize that data. We also have Evebox, which is actually supported by one of our Suricata team members. And so this is one of the scenarios, okay, and that's what's on the training distro. It can be others. You can hook it up into Splunk. It has different output possibilities. So you know, if you don't want to use Kibana, you can use Grafana. Literally, it has native industry standard JSON output, so you can basically plug it into anything. And here is just one example of a scenario deployment. All of these components are detachable, so it can scale, of course. Now, major features of Suricata. As I mentioned, we got standard-based formats. You know, YAML from configuration, JSON for output. Makes it easier to integrate into CAMs. You know, those are standard formats. It's multi-threaded by birth, by default, by definition. It scales and it's fast. There is deployments out there for the past few years that have been on 100 gigabits and more. It has auto protocol detection, so it can automatically detect, let's say, HTTP, HTTP2, and similar things. You don't need to specify any ports or anything like that. It will do its job. It has advanced support for some of the most heaviest protocols like DNS, SMTP, TLS, HTTP, plus a lot of others, of course. Natively can do file extraction out of FTP, SMTP, HTTP 1 and 2, HTTP 2 as well, SMB, NFS and similar, file hashing, not to mention the list. That's all the easy stuff, to be very honest. And a lot more. I tried to pack everything in here, or as much as I could. Pardon me. So Suricata is written in Rust, okay? Pardon me, Suricata is written in C plus Rust. We started adopting Rust as well as it helped guaranteeing thread safety a couple of years back, and so far we've been doing great, and very thankful for that. Suricata can use Lua scripting, can use signatures to do thread detection, can use, as I mentioned, any threat intel, any match lists that you give it to her, IP list, domain reputation. It can extract TLS certificates, whichever one you choose, or all as it sees them. It has many possibilities to do logging, different protocol logging. So, and it doesn't really matter if it's alerting or not. You can still output the HTTP transaction log, the HTTP protocol logs, the file transaction logs, SMB, Kerberos, SSH, SMTP. It can go on and many more. J3, J3S. That's always and also there. It's got Scala protocol support too. So it's really quite versatile. One of the greatest benefits actually when deploying Suricata is actually that Suricata also provides its own protocol evidence. Okay, so you have an alert, and often enough you wonder, well, is that alert true or false positive? Do I have any protocol logs or any other logs surrounding that before and after what happened, or during that transaction? So in order I can determine better if that's okay, true or false positive, or something that I need to act on now. On the screen, you actually see an example. What you see here, I'm going to start from top to bottom, is basically an alert. The alert is called ET info executable server attached HTTP. Right. On what you see underneath is basically a tab that says related alert, related file info, related flow, and related HTTP. What this means is that with this alert, there was also a file transaction log, an HTTP log, and another alert. So giving you all that information. And on the screen, you also have the HTTP part. So for example, the method, the protocol, the status, the length, user agents, URLs, any of that stuff is in there. and a small also screenshot of the file transaction information in there. Anything like name of the file, size, were there any gaps while the files were transferred, is there, pardon me, what kind of file it is, in this case, executable, and all sorts, the shells, the MD5 sums are there too. So all sorts of that information is available in there. So you can actually, you're not looking just on an alert, you're looking at an alert plus all the protocol logs around it to support that as evidence for your decision making. Okay, so just by having that capability to natively produce that, it's a big plus. Why? Especially while you're investigating things. What else? This is actually a screenshot from AnyRun. AnyRun is online sandboxing. Actually, it's some features are publicly available, so you can just sign up for free and do your own detonation in there. And they're actually also using Suricata, and they're using Suricata to assist in malware analysis in that sandboxing for, in order to provide alerting in there, and if needed, any of the other protocol data. So you have that side of it as well. Besides all that, as I mentioned, one of the features of Suricata is actually pickup ingestion. So what does this mean, and the benefit of it? So I just want to give you a couple of hints of the major features as we move along, and then we will go on to the hands-on example. So what does pickup ingestion mean? Well, there's a couple of variations there. Okay, so we have many ways to ingest a pickup. One is to simply pass a pickup on the command line. Suricata will read it and will output all the logs, alerts, and whatever else is needed to output. There's also a possibility to point Suricata to a specific folder. And now when you do that, Suricata will actually continuously read pickups from that folder until it reaches and it has read all pickups. Or if you keep feeding the pickups in there, Suricata will continue reading it. It will pause when there's none or nothing left to read, and then it will continue reading as you throw pickups in that folder. So very handy when actually when you're in a role, especially in some incident response or just in simple QA stuff. Okay. It has another possibility. Unix socket. So what does this mean? This means like the Suricata stacks in the Unix socket, and you literally via an agent, if you via Unix socket itself, actually you're feeding on pickups. You can say read that pickup, then you can say later read that pickup as well, or read these 100 pickups, and it's very good and easy for programmatically, actually, let's say Python or whatever, scripting it out and feeding it off. Suricata is often used in batch pickup processing modes as well, with sandboxing and similar things. So a bit, just in terms of pickup, a few possibilities. While we're talking about pickup, so Suricata can also do a full packet capture. In other words, you spin it up, you feed off some traffic of that tap or a span port, and you can tell Suricata, hey, can you please just do full packet capture, save everything on disk as you read it. So it can do it per thread. So you'll have many, so let's say if you have 20 Suricata threads, you'll have 20 pickups and they'll rotate on disk, and similar things Suricata will take care of that. Or you can write into one, but it can just write it down on disk for you, no problem. The benefit of that, of course, is gives the ability to timeline things. So look in history, go back, do more thorough investigation, mine traffic for anomalies, forensic evidence, not to mention the list. Yeah. So that's one type of the output that it does. We can talk about the other thing that Suricata can output for you in terms of, let's say, pure logs. So Suricata has JSON output by default. The file that Suricata outputs all logs, whether it's alerts or protocol logs, is called eve.json, an extensible event format. So default location is in the var log Suricata, and all that, or the logging section in particular, if you will, is of course configured in the if section of Suricata, suricata.yaml. As I mentioned, YAML is the config file, the config format for the suricata.yaml file, which is the configuration file of Suricata. And in there, you also have a lot more other options, anything and everything with respect to specific Suricata configuration, memcaps, logging, protocol, and meta logging, and similar things. So besides that, Suricata can actually ship things out directly to Redis, syslog, or Unix socket. So we have versatility. There is options in there of how to do those things. Now, excuse me. One of the major also, I think, advantages of Suricata is the so-called FlowID. And excuse me. And what does this mean? So it's a native Suricata ability to basically correlate all protocol logs to an alert. So you're actually providing network security log evidence, and actually you're correlating alerts to, let's say, you can also correlate different alerts to a protocol transaction log. So actually enhancing the hunting perspective and capabilities. What does this actually mean? I mean, it looks good on the PowerPoint slide here, but I'm guessing if you don't know it, may be wondering what exactly is this. So this is the following. As you can see on your screen here, this is actually a screenshot from Evebox. And these are actually one way to look at Suricata logs. So what does it mean? We start from top to bottom. We basically have 4 flow records, okay? So 4 flow records for the transaction, you know, and these flow records will actually contain packets, bytes, sizes, ports, IPs, and similar things for those transactions. Then it's followed by a type called file info. This is the actual file transaction log. This actually contains anything and everything was specific to that file that was transferred. Where from, host name if it's HTTP, or sizes of the file, type of the file, and similar. Then it's followed, as you can see underneath the file info, we have a type HTTP. This is an HTTP transaction log. Okay, so in this case, we have a GET request to that HTTP host. So this is the transaction log for that HTTP GET request. So far, we don't have an alert. So far, these are only protocol logs that Suricata creates. We haven't started talking about alerts yet. So these are different than alerts. So then you have, as you can see, the bottom 2, those are actually 2 alerts. And they're basically saying there's an executable and a server attached HTTP. So if you look at the top of that screenshot, it says FlowID 170.152.69. What this means is all these records are sharing the same FlowID. In other words, the 2 alerts, the HTTP transaction log, the file transaction log, and the flow records were part of the same conversation, part of the same flow. So they all share that common FlowID, and that makes it real easy to correlate alerts to actually network protocol logs and similar, and vice versa. Now, a point I like to make. If you run Suricata, let's say without signatures, without rules, this screen would look exactly the same. The only thing that will be missing there is the 2 alerts on the bottom. So Suricata will still continue to function and produce those network security logs, even without alerts. Just FYI. So something I'd like to point out because it's actually very good for threat hunting, and that's one of the things I would like to show you in our bit of a hands-on session. Now, let's talk a little bit about the pyramid of pain. Okay. Usually, when we're threat hunting, it means that we're actually looking for something based on a clue, or an anomaly, or an IOC, or whichever that may be. You're actually diving in. David Bianco came up with this pyramid of pain in 2013. And you have, from the bottom up, you have the different levels that he put in, and I think they're very quite interesting. So you can match on hash values, okay? And he says that's trivial. You can match on IP addresses, and that's easy, you know. You can match on domain names, or look after domain names, or do domain investigation. That's more simple stuff. Then it gets harder and harder, because at some point you need to start digging network and host artifacts. You need to try to figure out what kind of tools, or what kind of application, or what kind of whichever may be the adversaries are using. That's challenging. And then you have to find the techniques, tactics, and procedures, the TTPs, and that's tough. And it's tough because once you find it, they can change their TTPs as well. So you can switch. So this is the traditional, always ongoing cat and mouse type of game. Now, when I'm threat hunting, I always kind of think about that pyramid and I go, okay, that was easy. So now the next step will be a bit tougher. So I have to figure it out, or I need to kind of automate it and see what's going to happen. So let's talk a little bit about what I want to show you hands-on. And I think you should find it interesting. So what I'll show you hands-on, actually these are live results from yesterday, because I was trying it out in one specific production system that we have, because I really wanted to actually give something so you can folks take back and try it out at home, not just to talk conceptually how things are done, but just show an example of actually one example that actually worked. And mind you, this is only one example. There could be hundreds and thousands of others. You know, this is just one. Now, what you see here on the screen is basically executables transferred. So on the left-hand side on the column, you see the HTTP host name, in other words. So what host name served to the destination IP in the middle column, what file, column number 3 from left to right, and what's the file name actually, and the count, how many times. Now, I explained to you how I get there, and I'll actually show you hands-on how you can get there too. What is interesting usually in those hunting processes, okay, you have clear text executable transfers, and you would think like, well, that doesn't happen too much. Nowadays everything is encrypted. Yeah, but it does happen a crap load, and it happens so much that actually SOC teams don't have the time to actually go through all the clear text executable transfers to figure out if they need attention or not. So it does happen quite a while. And you also have threat actors who, of course, doesn't really care because they're basically untouchable, sitting in some different geopolitical situation and location. So they can do pretty much whatever they want without needing to worry too much about the long arm of the law, at least in the places where they are. So what we had here is actually what looked interesting to me yesterday, and we started a couple of investigations on that, is actually if you can see the yellow and the orange mark. So what made an impression is that while I was hunting, I saw kind of the same file name with the same hash being searched from 3 different locations, and those were not like 3 different calls locations. They look like totally different. So that was interesting to me. And then we started doing a little bit of more checks here and there. So now it's very easy to have threat intel and to know what domains or host names are out there, and similar things, and to check things out and further dive in. So what happens was this was actually known, at least red listed domains on VirusTotal. There was much more information with paid subscriptions. So threat intel and similar things. But what's important is actually how it got there. Because actually what we had there is we had millions of events that day. So sorry, millions of alerts. Okay, so on that specific system there was an average of 5 million alerts, and never mind the rest of the protocol data. Like there were 5 million alerts, and that was like 100 more million other events, DNS, HTTP, and you name it. So out of all these, you kind of I said, let's go try to figure out a nice example to share with all the attendees tomorrow for my talk. And I just dove in. So it's a lot of data to just crunch in and zoom on one thing. But it's actually not that difficult, and I'll show you how. What you need to watch out as well is it's very easy to click on a threat intel provider or on VirusTotal or similar and be like, oh, this is red listed. In a lot of cases, some domains are not even available. They're not even listed, or in a lot of cases, they're actually dynamically generated, or some of the worst case scenarios is when you have an executable downloaded from a newly registered domain that kind of disappears after a couple of days. So these are one of the worst cases. So watch out for those things. So if something is red listed, it's one thing, but if something is fairly new, so that domain is being around only for 1-2 days or 1 week or whatever, that's often enough not very friendly, at least in my experience. Now, so watch out for those things. All right. What I want to do now is I'm going to switch over to that training distro that you have access to. I'm going to walk you through that concept that I have. Inside the folder with the link that I've shared, there is actually exactly that dashboard. So you can pick it up and plug it up in any of your environments. As long as you have Elk Stack or Kibana, it will work, no problem. It doesn't need to be that specific distro that I've shared with you. You can plug it in any Elk Stack, no problem. And hopefully it will be useful to you. All right, so for the purposes, let's see. I'm going to do a quick intro to that distro. And so what we have here is actually the distro based on Selks, as I mentioned. It's called Selks because it has Suricata, the Elk Stack, Sirius, and Evebox, and a couple other platforms, a couple other applications in there. So what is interesting, Evebox, CyberChef, and similar. So it's kind of, it's all built around the data and only the data that Suricata produces. So anything in that distro, the data in there is entirely and only produced by Suricata. Now we have the landing page in here. What I want to show you, so you have a couple of tools in here. Kibana, of course, is part of the Elk Stack. Evebox is actually a tool to visualize the alerts and the transaction records from Suricata, written by Jason Ish, who is part of the Suricata team. Sirius itself has an open source version, and that's by Established Networks. It's available on GitHub, and they're all available inside the Selks distro, so you can fire it up. Selks distro is also as an ISO, or it serves as an ISO, but it's also, you can just spin it up very easily with Docker Compose. All available, README on GitHub. Just basically copy paste and you'll be up and running. Now, what I wanted to show you is the following, though. So quickly, we will go to the Kibana dashboards in here. So, and I mentioned we want to talk a little bit about executables, right? So let's talk about executables. I'm gonna go to jump in, and as you can see here, you have about 28, I think, different dashboards and over 400 visualizations. So there's a lot of firepower in there. Actually, maybe even too much. So if I'd like to look at the alerts, and I've run a PCAP that is for malware traffic analysis, and I think the PCAP had Buzzer and Cobalt Strike in there. But what is interesting is like the first foothold, the first way in. And usually, traditionally, that's achieved by, you receive an email, come to my birthday party, so to speak, some sort of phishing, some sort of social engineering. You open an attachment, and it could be a way in. But then after way in, you actually, usually the malware, traditionally, we need to understand where it's sitting, to detonate, to see if it can exploit something or to download something else, or to download more stuff that it needs. And since we're talking about executables, and it can get pretty tenuous. So here in this pickup run, we have 75 alerts, okay? But yesterday on that system, I was looking at 5 million in 24 hours. So things get really dense when you talk those numbers. Now, we will not dive through the whole pickup and everything. I just want to talk to you about one thing that you can actually take home and try it out yourself. As we can see here in the Kibana dashboard, there's many things, and this is just the alerts, okay? So as I mentioned, there's 28 other dashboards that are not alert-based at all, they're just protocol data. And so you have your regular and traditional breakdown by top destinations and similar things, and that's all very interesting. And what you can see here is actually basically the alerts that I have from this pickup, and I have a nice, little bit of a nice breakdown in here. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes with signatures you can see stuff right away and say, okay, I need to trigger that. But in a lot of cases, signatures are not enough to figure out if that was bad or not. In our case here, we see a bizarre backdoor. So okay, that's a red flag right away. But there's some other pickups in malware traffic analysis, and especially when you arrive on low systems, so there's no signature coverage for everything. So, and that's the tough part. And that's what I want to show a little bit about the tough part. Now, the tough part is to be able to say when an executable file transfer is seen online, when is that something that's worthy of your attention, or that's something that it's okay, you can pass it on. In a lot of cases in Suricata deployments, these signatures here, policy P executable, info packed executable, info exe server attached, usually these are one of the first signatures that get suppressed or turned off because people say they're very verbose and they're actually full of false positives. I never look at the signature as, let's say, purely from false or true positives. I look at it as a context, specifically for the executables. Now, when I looked at that PCAP, and then I looked at my live system and I say, okay, this is great here. I know you have these basically, 6 or 7 unique alerts. I can tell you right away what's bad, but things change drastically different when you're looking at 5 million alerts. There you don't have such an easy way to look and be like, hey, this is bad. No, you need to actually go dig it out when you're doing active threat hunting. So as I was investigating, something took my attention. And that was pretty simple, actually. Let's look at just the executables. Okay, the executable signatures. We have 3 in this case here. So what does this mean? Well, one is for the transaction, the other one says packed executable download. So usually a packed executable means that it's actually compressed. Okay, so often enough, there's a reason for that. Now, if you take, and here is the actual, the not the secret, but the trick or the hint that can help you out. If you take any one of these signatures separately, they actually don't mean that much. Okay, there was an executable transfer. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad right away. I mean, executable transfers happen all the time, any given day, any given minute. They're flying around. It doesn't exactly mean it's bad. Actually, on the contrary, in most of the cases, it's not bad at all. It's either Chrome or some other update or a tool downloaded from somewhere. That does mean it's bad. However, what if we can minimize the number of events that we're looking and can zoom in more interesting stuff? And by that, I mean, if you see these three signatures coming in from the same IP, then that is a bit more interesting. Okay, and I'm talking here about generic way of actually doing it, of actually detecting potentially stuff that needs investigation or potential malware. If those three come in from the same source or alerting on the same source and destination, from the same host, let's say, then that is a bit more interesting than actually each one of them separately. So how do we do that? For you, I've prepared this search, so I can just come in here and say hunt executables. And you can see they went down to 3 alerts from 75. On the live system, yesterday, the one that I was working on, it went down from 5 million to 400 cases. That was a pretty good noise reduction. Not necessarily noise reduction, but a pretty good zoom. And it helped me a lot. So basically what I said is just zoom on these three signatures, just these three guys. And that gave me this basically, if you will, kind of formula here. I have these three signatures. They are having the same source IP and the same destination IP. What does this mean? This basically means that this host name here served that internal IP an executable. And here the count is 3 because each alert has alerted once. So now on a production system, this will look a lot more similar. You will, of course, have more data in here, but you'll zoom in from a lot of millions of events to these guys. And then after you filter out pretty much whitelist a couple of domains, let's say like Microsoft and a couple of hosts in here that you actually know because you're sitting and you know the environment that you're hunting, or you know a customer that you have deployed the environment there. You will pretty quickly zoom at something that is much more interesting. And that's actually the screenshot that's in my presentation with the executable downloads from yesterday. I was zooming in. We had actually we had an incident open on that, and that's how I found them. And it didn't take me much time to dig them out because this was not executable transfer that actually alerted on known malware or known patterns, or they were not in IOCs. But when I zoomed in and then I looked at then we looked at did a bit more investigation, the host name and similar things, and we started to find a bit of more worrying stuff. So we continued on with investigation. But the most important part of this formula here is like hunting for executables. So have a look at executables from a different perspective. Don't suppress these executable alerts just because they're false positives. They're given context. Yeah, sure. You might not need all 100,000 of them today, but they're giving you that context that you might need when nothing else gives you context about there's something bad going on the network that you need to figure out. So in this case here, we have HTTP hostname or HTTP server called CHD, serving that internal IP. The URL is missing and it's counts 3 because it actually, we have 3 of these alerts, 3 unique of these. So that is the actual formula that we go by. All these 3 together are much more potent, meaningful than a separate signature, just looking at one signature itself. And when we're talking, as I mentioned, we want to talk about evidence. So if you go to any of these and you click correlate here, you'll come right in your box and you'll see, okay, here is the flow record, here's the file transaction record, here's my HTTP record. And You can click any of those and you'll see this is actually the file transaction record. So there's nothing to do with the alert. It's just shared the same FlowID as the alert is part of the same transaction. So here is the file information about the file that was transferred, the size, if it's executable, the SHAs, what it's named, and a lot more information, the HTTP part where it was served from, the URL was missing, was not there because it was part of the packed executable, but you have that information in here, the user agents, you name it. And of course, the raw JSON in here. Similar information you can dig into Sirius. As I mentioned, this is typically a threat hunting application. We have predefined, ready to go filters for hunters. So this is the Sirius, the community edition. You can just simply zoom in and say, hey, find me exactly that same formula I just show you, but find me out with a simple click with a filter set that provides a hunting perspective. And basically what this says is, show me all executables here in Sirius that are served by HTTP. You can have a look at the alerts itself. You can have a look at the payload printable. You can see that this is an executable, of course. You have the HTTP metadata here and all the supported evidence, as I mentioned, as I showed you before on the screenshot. This conversation between these two IPs generated 2 more alerts. Here is the file transaction. Here is the related flow records. Packets bytes to server to clients, anything and everything. Here is the actual HTTP transaction itself, and inside you have everything: the HTTP request headers, the full-blown HTTP transaction log. So this is just another view how we can get to it. So you have the Sirius hunting, you have the Eve box for correlation of that specific alert, and you have the Kibana. And I've been just barely scratching the surface here because there's much more and many more opportunities. And even if some of the visualizations, they are ready to go. And so basically, if you click on IP, it'll just bring it to Aristotle and it'll tell you if it's seen that somewhere else or not and similar. Now, again, this is it. This dashboard and the actual search filter is exported in the folder. This is what I wanted to actually show you. And if you see my screen, I need to jump all the way back at the bottom. I wanted to show you one more time the screenshot that was actually, I did that yesterday based on that formula I just show you, and the dashboard that you have in there. It has a saved query search. You can zoom in right there. And that's how I got to these guys here from a live production system. I just want to thank you, the Wireshark community, and thank you folks for joining in. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions that you folks have. We have a few minutes for a Q&A session. Please feel free to fire them up on the Q&A or on the chat system or similar things, and I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. Angelo, Betty, a radio check here. You guys still hear me okay and everything is good, right?
I hear you perfect. You sound great. It's nice to hear an Italian voice at SharkFest again.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm not talking to myself.
No, sir. No, you've got over 30 people raptly listening to everything you say.
All right, cool. Very, very thankful for having me here, guys. Thank you very much, and thankful for all the participants. I'll try to answer any of your questions. Now, let's see.
You do have one from you do have a question from Asim in the chat.
Oh yeah, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I had one too. When you're done with answering that.
Okay, let me see. I'll read it out loud there. Can it save the actual alert executable to be reverse engineered later or sandbox? It detects a bad executables as it stores the actual files. Yes, it can. It has file extraction. So basically, you can say, if you alert on this file, store it to disk natively. You don't need to do much magic in there. It has that capability, absolutely. Yeah.
Does it do it by default?
No. So
Awesome.
by default, it does deduplication. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So in other words, if you download the same file 5 times, it will save the file once, and it will just save 4 more logs that the file was downloaded, but it was the same file. So it has native deduplication, which is great because it would not fill up the disk real fast. But you need to switch it on. So we purposefully don't have it on because you never know where you're deploying. You know, it might be a smaller VM or a Docker Raspberry Pi even, you know. So you need to just go in and switch it. But to do that is very easy. It's actually just change a config setting, or you can just even switch it on the command line.
The YAML.
Like -- switch it on. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And oh, no worries. You were, when you talk that much, people don't realize how hard that is on your throat and your mouth. Yeah, so dry. So I had one question. You had discussed PCAP ingestion, and you know that you could do multiple PCAPs. And what I wanted to ask, do you mean like do multiple PCAPs in multiple, you know, pools, or you know, whatever it's called in Suricata, or can you put like I would say I could do a merge cap for a bunch of files that I want to merge together. So and then so how do you guys do it?
So
is it individual or what?
Well, let's say hypothetically you have the files in a folder, right? And you have 10 files in there.
Exactly.
So it will start picking up one by one, you know. And if you throw in a merged in cap, it will digest it in as well. So basically, kind of like just open the door and start shoveling in, so to speak.
So it'll merge them for me and give me a cumulative piece of information. That's awesome.
It will go through all of them. Yeah, it will go through all of them and output, all the logs out and similar things. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then actually, Yuli had a question. Is the Selks ISO usable for production installation or only to test and learn?
Both, actually.
Okay.
Of course, there is some limitations because, I mean, you cannot just go and plug it into, let's say, 10 gigabit a second pipeline because it will be just too much data. From architectural perspective, it's best to decouple it. You have an Elasticsearch cluster because you have a lot of data, and then have Suricata and the rest of the management and hunting tools. But anything for up to a couple of gigabits per second, there's no problem to plug it in. Just size the hardware properly, and that's it.
Gotcha.
Anything for more, like let's say 10, 40 gigabit a second, you would need to do the proper decoupling as well, because you would need the proper database. You need the Elasticsearch cluster because there'll be a lot of data, and you'll need multiples, let's say Suricata, a 10G, 40G, a 5G, similar things. So I'll say yes, it's good for production and test. It's not ready to plug in on very heavy lines. On very heavy lines, you need to decouple. That's it. It can also be used. So it's not only the ISO. You can do Docker. You can lift it up in any, like whatever, CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu. If you have Docker, there's also in exactly 4 lines you can lift up the whole thing in Docker. All different Dockers, like Elasticsearch Docker, Suricata Docker, Serious Docker, Evebox Docker. They all be just Dockerized. It's very easy to do. It's all on README on GitHub.
Awesome.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Uli. He's the one who asked the question.
Thanks, Uli. Much appreciated. Sure thing.
He's one of the core devs. He's really awesome.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Cool stuff. I'm available on Discord and all that, so more than happy to, and I'm around, so if you have any questions later on or similar things, just ping me up, no problem. Anytime. Any more questions, folks? Let's see.
And we're going to be, this is in Zoom too. So, since you're going to be around, if people have questions, they can post them there in the Zoom 2 discussion, even though other conversations are also going on. And so that's the perfect place to look for Peter. So.
All right, I'll be there. No, I'm there already. Sorry, I'm just saying I'll be around. No problem.
Yeah, I got Discord going on in the background too. So.
Sure. Absolutely. I just wanted to not oversee it. A big thank you to the folks from Wireshark, from SharkFest, for you guys, all the people in the background that are making it happen and setting it up. I know from our own perspective, when we need to organize a conference and all that, it's a lot of demanding work. So thank you very much. And I even said to Angelo last time we did the radio check on Zoom, keep doing what you're doing, much appreciated, and keeping the spirits up. And thank you to all the attendees as well that joined us. I hope it was useful. I wanted them to be able to walk out with something they can try in their own environment that actually works. I didn't want to talk about concepts only. So much appreciated for your time.